Namaste, sir. Welcome to Signature Studios.
Jai Shri Ramji, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, Jai Shri Ram to you, sir. Recently, there is a documentary is going on in India. BBC is trying to destroy the Narendra Modi and doing the sanatandharma, who is leading gurus are there. Especially, we are seeing BBC doing the bird documentary on him. So, what do you think? Why you started this documentary? And before doing this interview, please introduce yourself to our subscribers, please.
It's a wonderful place to start, thank you. So, my name is Satish Sharma, I live in the United Kingdom. I was born here in Bharat, in Punjab, a long time ago, before you were even conceived. I've been around a long time. I've been in the UK for almost 60 years.
Okay.
In that time, I have been in multiple professions, financial, IT and things like this. But my interest and my work has always been to do with our history, our Sanskriti, our Shastra, our teaching, and the incredible body of wisdom that we have accumulated.
Okay.
So I have an advantage in that I can speak in the English language and know a little bit about our sanatandharma.
Okay.
And so I happily talk about these issues outside of Bharat.
So basically, Satish, you have born and brought up in India.
Ji.
When did you shift to UK?
7 years old.
So now you're currently staying and you're about to UK, or you're...
Well, I'm very lucky because my family had strong connections with Bharat all the time.
Okay.
So we used to come back regularly.
So.
And we still have very good connections in Punjab, which is where I was born.
Okay.
And so all of the utsavs, all of the tyohar, we celebrated here. Mundan Sanskar, all of these things. My children had their Mundan Sanskars here. We've done the yatras to Chintapurni, Jwalaji and the Kumbh Mela and everything. So we're very much established in being here as well.
How come, why did you started the documentary BBC on Trial?
So many reasons. The BBC is very powerful. It has always been very powerful. And its charter is a magnificent piece of work. It defines the highest standards, the greatest ethics, the morality, so beautifully and perfectly sculpted. But we noticed that in one area, those charter ethics and morality were thrown out of the window, especially to do with anything relating to Bharat, relating to Bharatiya history, and relating to Sanatan Dharma in particular. They have developed an incredible skill, an ability to curse while smiling and pretending to be friends. And they were doing this increasingly since 2014.
Okay.
So we noticed this, and I've been in touch with them at the highest levels, spoken with the Director General's office, and he arranged for me to have meetings with their heads of all the departments, but they didn't change at all. And so it became apparent to us that they were not interested in evolving and developing a good relationship. So they had an agenda, and we decided to find out what that agenda was. The documentary is the culmination of the research, and I think in the evidence we've proven that the BBC does not follow its charter, that the BBC's primary goal is not to entertain, educate.
So you mean to say whatever the documentaries did by the BBC, it's a false or what on Narendra Modi? Or
It's
else?
propaganda.
Okay.
It's carefully sculpted propaganda. Its intention is to create a particular image and an impression in the minds of the person who watches them. And it's not to report factual truth and events. It highlights certain small aspects whilst diminishing very big important aspects. For example, it highlighted the suffering of the Muslim community after 2002, implying that Narendra Modi was personally responsible. But it completely missed the fact that the Congress government was in power, that the Supreme Court investigated him and exonerated him of all guilt. So that's something you would want to mention. They missed it completely. And they do this with everything to do with reporting on Bharat, Sanatan Dharma especially, and BJP especially. We've seen this increase since 2014.
Does really the BBC intention is that Narendra Modi is like, he's not favorable to Islamic brothers and he's destroying the Islamic, he wants Sanatana Dharma to be launched in Bharat. Does really the BBC stories are true?
It's slightly more complicated.
Why BBC will do like such stories?
That's the
Such
question.
having
That's
a big
the
credibility
question.
in all over the world. on the global.
That's the question to ask, why? And so we decided to find out why. And the evidence that we've produced, the conclusion we came to, is that the BBC has an agenda to cause conflict. The old imperial recipe of divide and rule, divide and conquer, in today's world is divide and exploit. So when they can create conflict between family members, they can then come in with a solution. Or maybe the solution is to eradicate one of those family members so that the other one will follow the BBC's and the British imperial design. It's clear this is not a news broadcasting organization. This is a very powerful means of creating perceptions. It can create in the minds of a large number of people worry, fear. It can incite all of these things, and then when the moment is right, trigger them. And it has been doing this for a long time. And the evidence that we had, the BBC was involved in regime changes. And we found 42 British regime change operations. Who would believe that after the war, the Britain is still engaged in regime change? And yet it is. Who would believe that the BBC, that wonderful arbiter and presenter of factual information, is actually an organization invested in creating chaos, using deceit, and, shall we say, even covering up human rights abuses. And that's the truth of it.
Also, some of people are allegations on you that you was funded by the Narendra Modi, sometimes telling by some sanatandharma gurujis. Then what you will say? Wantedly, you are doing a strong allegation, such a credibility channel, the BBC. What do you think actually?
I'm really not too concerned. You know, when grown-up people engage in a conversation, they rely on facts and evidence. If you don't have facts, you don't have evidence, then you resort to allegations, you resort to ad hominem accusations. And I've always believed that anybody who resorts to an ad hominem accusation has already admitted that they've lost the debate. So why expend energy on people like that? I would love to see any evidence. I have had no connection whatsoever with the BJP. I have not had the pleasure of the company of Prime Minister Modi ji, and yet there are many allegations. In fact, I'll share with you, when Prime Minister Modi ji came to the United Kingdom, to Wembley, all of the Hindu leadership were present to meet him, and the only person who didn't get an invitation was me. So there's my evidence that I have.
So there were no connections.
No connections whatsoever.
Then why you are doing then? Purely for what?
Our Dharmic principles are very simple. We look to try and help everybody have the maximum of anand, the minimum of suffering, and the minimum of consumption. Those are the three foundational principles of sanatandharma.
But in Bharat, there are so many people like you actually. Why only Satish ji started doing this actually? Why only you?
Are there so many people like me?
In Bharat, there are so many people are there to concern about the dharma. But why only you took the step in doing this such?
I would say that if one engages in sadhana, then you start to see things differently. And I'll share with you a very simple understanding. For example, in the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna asks Bhagwan, he says, what should I do? And Sri Krishna ji says to him, Yatha ichasi tatha kuru. He doesn't say, go and have a plan, go and do some analysis. He says, act. And the very two first words in the Gita are Dharma kshetra, Kuru kshetra. That the Dharma kshetra belongs to the Kurus, those who are doing things. And we don't have enough people who are doing things. We have a lot of people who are talking, who are analyzing, who are trying to understand, who are trying to create awareness. But nothing changes until you act. And so we need more people who are acting. And the pleasure I've had in working with Vinodji and String, Geo, is amazing because he is a person who acts. We need more people who act. And if we get out of our 1.3 billion people, only 0.5% of people who act rather than talk, everything will change.
How did you get connected with the String Vinod?
Well, even sitting...
And why you chosen him actually?
Even sitting in the United Kingdom, we had a lot of pleasure and enjoyment and excitement with the material that Vinodji was publishing. He is courageous. And somebody very wise said to me once, he said, Panditji, courage is infectious. You can't teach it, you only catch it from other people. And so he's one of those people who infects people with a courageous act. And he's also selfless. And so when we understood that YouTube had cancelled his channel, I made a mental note that this is somebody who we should work with. When the research that we had done on the BBC was completed, I needed somebody with a wonderful voice, and I needed somebody who could convert the research into incredible videography. And so naturally that would be Vinodji.
Then tell me, sir, actually, who funded to BBC?
The BBC is a very clever organisation, and there are two streams of funding. One which they make a lot of noise about, and the other which they don't make much noise about at all. The image of being a public broadcaster means that you're funded by the public, and so you need to have some sort of revenue stream which comes from there. But the real funding for the BBC comes from non-public sources. Now that is a serious concern, because then it means you can't be independent. If private sources are funding you, then they're not doing it out of just charity and because you're good friends or anything. They're doing it because they have an intention, they have an outcome that they want. So the majority of the funding is from private sources and a small amount from public sources.
What is the serious concern about BBC? What is their serious concern actually? Why did they started BBC? What do you think actually?
Taking the clock back to 1927, that was a world in which racism and fascism were very strong. We're talking of a time when Europeans were preparing to inflict unbelievable violence and genocide on Jewish people. We're talking about a time when white supremacy was supported by the church, when black people were deemed not to be fully human beings, persona non grata. And in that time, the imperial designs of the British were to rule the world. They wanted to enslave the world. Remember, the other half of the coin from ruling is enslaving. You can't rule over people unless you have got some sort of domination. And at that time, they wanted to enslave the world. This was clear in the minutes of the meetings in the House of Commons, House of Lords. They felt superior and they were racist. But if you're going to conquer the world, what do you need? More than anything else, you need manpower.
Yes.
And the one place which had a huge number of people who were actually experienced in warfare was Bharat. The Bharatiyas had been fighting invasions from the northwest frontier for well over 1200 years. And so we had experience in that. We also had Damascus steel, as it's called, which was really Bharatiya steel. We had strategy, we had Shastra describing warfare, and they needed those people. How do you communicate and convert a whole population to become your foot soldiers, to become your farmers, to become your resource providers, to your war machine? You need to reach them. And the BBC was set up in order to be able to do that.
So BBC on a mission or what?
I'm sorry, the BBC?
On a mission or what?
The BBC is clearly on a mission. There's a second thing. You will
Is that
find...
true actually?
Yeah.
Is that true?
Oh, it is. The evidence is in the outcomes. The evidence is in the product. You know, they say that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. When you study the outcomes of the BBC's broadcasting, and many people have, in the documentary we refer to some of these studies, it's conclusive. In some areas they're heavily biased for, in others they're heavily biased against. And in both situations they deny the terms of their charter. So they are definitely having to do this with some sort of an intention. But there is something which I think the Bharatiya citizens really should recognize. When a person steals and accumulates a huge amount of wealth, you will always find them suddenly become very charitable. They will suddenly create foundations to hide and to use some of that wealth and to create an incredible reputation for them.
So you mean to say...
The BBC is the reputation manager for the colonialist heart of the British Empire.
What do you think? Is BBC is threatening to the globe or only Bharat?
The BBC is the people behind the BBC are most threatened by Bharat. A renaissance in Bharat will have one impact, and that is that we will start to decolonize. When we start to decolonize, we will scrutinize our history. And there is a great movement now re-scrutinizing the history that we have. And in that history, what we will discover are atrocities and human rights abuses which would make the most hardened criminal weep tears of shame. And they do not want that to happen.
Satish, you have started a documentary called BBC on Trial.
Ji.
So how succeed you are doing this documentary? How many evidence that you have gained, and how did you gain this documentary, and how succeed you are to doing this documentary?
The documentary is phase one. There's no point in producing a documentary unless something changes. And so in my mind, I thought, what would be a good change? And a good change would be the BBC becoming honest. But that's not going to happen. Bullies do not stop bullying until there's a cost to them. Otherwise, they will carry on. And so we thought, how do we engage with this global bully? And the only way to engage with them is to make them realize that if they continue, they will suffer a harm. And that's really what the documentary was setting the groundwork for. But how do we get such a big corporation to bow down and become humble, to become regretful, to express some sort of atonement? The only way to do it is in a court of law. In a court of law, there will be two things that will happen. One, their credibility will be brought into question. When Sonia Gandhi appeared in court and was referred to as the accused, something magical happened. The mystique disappeared. Up until that moment, we were all conditioned to believe, "Ye to hoga hi nahi, this is not possible."
Yes.
And yet it all disappeared. The day the BBC appears in court, their credibility will be questioned globally. That has to happen. Secondly, when the evidence is presented, they'll have to defend their position.
Yes.
And it's indefensible. The only thing left is there a court of law in Bharat which has got the integrity and the, shall we say, confidence on their ability to see justice, which will deliver a verdict? We will find out.
What type of justice that you are looking?
I would like to see the BBC banned in Bharat.
Do you really think BBC will ban in India?
Why not?
How come?
Why not? Why are they even here? You see, behind this, there is a very imperial attitude. And the attitude is what's called the white man's burden. That the white man has the right to go anywhere and do anything. Now, if we think of the global village in the context of the BBC, it's like saying the BBC has the right to go to any house in that village, to poke around in the private affairs of whatever's happening in that house, to then go to all the other houses and tell them what's happening there, and to lie about it with the intention of harming that family in that house. Why? Why does that even have legitimacy? I don't see it has legitimacy at all. And if they were to say freedom of speech, then my answer to them would be very simple. Why was Julian Assange in prison for 5 years without charges? Why isn't RT allowed to broadcast? Why was Republic TV's license withdrawn? You can't have freedom of speech, meaning I can talk but you can't. That's not, that doesn't seem to be quite right to me. And so we've got every right to be able to say to them, we have the evidence that you are not a good faith broadcaster, that your participation and your commentary on the affairs of Bharat are against your own charter standards. And not only that, they cause community cohesion issues within India. Those three characteristics are sufficient, I think, for any court to say, until you do that properly, you're not allowed to broadcast in Bharat. I think that's necessary. I think it's doable.
Does really necessity is there to ban the BCC in Bharat?
Ji,
Why?
you'll have to watch the documentary and see the evidence. But the evidence is there of regime change operations. And there's a regime change operation going on right now. And there has been ever since the documentary on Prime Minister Modi. That was stage one of a regime change operation. And it hasn't stopped.
Okay.
There is a history of colonial European, Euro-Christian colonialism destroying large countries and balkanizing them. And that's going on right now in front of our eyes. And the BBC is an active participant.
In India, nowadays, Hindus are more accused. They are changing their religion. Most of the time, Hindus are changing into Christianity. What do you think? Why Hindus are changing their religion? Because really Hindus don't have their own gods. They have a strong history. They have a strong religious book to know their history. Still, why they are changing? Because such in the global, if we see, Hinduism is the oldest religion in the world. But still, they are changing into the Christianity.
This is a longer conversation, but there are some simple points. We don't have to use their vocabulary to understand who we are. And you've described our experience in their framework. I don't do that. We don't have the idea of religions. If it does exist, a religion is a parampara. It is a panth. It is a subset of a dharmic experience. The dharmic definition is much larger. The trouble with Christianity and Islam, when they're considered as panth, is that they are competitive panths, violently competitive panths. Whereas within our tradition, we have so many paramparas and none of them are violently competitive. You can happily be a Hanuman Bhagat,
Yes.
and you will happily engage in pleasant existence with a Vaishnavite or a Shaivite. It doesn't matter. Whereas these ideologies are violently acquisitive. So from my point of view, they are just ideologies which are acquisitive. There is no evidence that they have a superior vision.
Yes.
The second problem is that in our view, everybody is born dharmic. The Brahmand is an expression of dharma. And so everything that manifests is part of the dharmic design.
Yes.
Every child is born dharmic, which is why you have to be initiated out of the dharmic family into something smaller.
Yes.
And in doing so, you diminish yourself and you become part of a divide and conflict formula. And this is nothing to do with divinity. This is nothing to do with Paramatma. And I'm also a little bit concerned that these parallel competitive, violently competitive paramparas, they have no respect for human rights. We're the only tradition which says that the divine feminine and the divine masculine are equal. And it's obvious.
Yes.
Why would you, what evidence can you produce to say that it's not so? The only way you can do this is to impose it through violence, which is why apostasy was a part of Christianity, and it still is to some degree. And apostasy is a fundamental part of the Islamist tradition. Wherever violence is present, we know that that has nothing to do with dharma. You know, we say ahimsa paramo dharma, and the state of violence is actually against dharma. It is adharma. And if we use our vocabulary, then you start to see all of this religious mumbo jumbo in a slightly different way.
What do you think? Is Bharat going to be a massive power of a Hindu country?
We are in the same state that Hanumanji was in that he had forgotten his true identity. And once we remember it, then we will be able to leap over oceans. We will be able to leap over and release our own Shakti, which at the moment is imprisoned under the control of Rakshasas. When we do that, there will be no stopping, because we are dharmic. And the whole world is dharmic. Every jiva, every plant is engaged in a dharmic existence. So why would we not be able to share that?
Okay, but when going to be happen this?
Probably next Tuesday. It will happen when we want it to happen. At the moment, we are decolonizing. There is no other nation which has had 1,200 years of the worst violence imaginable. We have had wave after wave of asuras and rakshasas, and yet our ideology and understanding is still there. We're clearing out the rubbish from what other people have said. And when you start to do that, the truth is really simple. It takes lies to be complicated.
Yes.
And we are a rishi culture. We are not a Andhavishwas culture. We look. And if something doesn't seem right to us when we look, we have no obligation to believe it. When I do talks in the West with other religious leaders, I always say to them, you call me an infidel, and actually I'm happy to be an infidel, so you don't have to believe anything I say. I don't need you to believe a word I'm saying. Feel free to reject it.
Yeah.
And this is our tradition. We look, we explore, we understand, we want to see, and we share when invited. Isn't that a better, more civilized way of existing?
Recently you have given your time, mind, money, we can say anything, on your documentary. What type of response you are getting from the India?
The current generation know that something is not right, but they don't know how to put it into words. And you need to put it into words so you can organize your thinking. What we have done in the documentary is we have put words and definition and form which allows people to say, actually, that's what I was thinking. Deep down, you know there's something wrong with the BBC. Everybody knows there's something wrong with the BBC,
Yes.
but we don't know precisely what. Once you know precisely what, then you can act on it.
Yes.
And the response we saw in the Hyderabad cinema was that response. People were shocked that Britain, which goes around the world saying we hold the standards of human rights, was engaged in 42 regime change operations, all of which are illegal. They're completely contrary to international law. And yet they were engaged in them, and people in the audience received that information. when they understood how the BBC manipulated the story of what happened in Leicester. Suddenly it was clear what had been done. And so the more you know, the more you understand, and the greater and the speedier your reaction.
When coming those type of truth to them, what type of the reaction that people giving to you back?
Here has been very good. In fact, in the cinema the other day, there was an elderly woman who sat there with her head in her hands saying, I didn't know this was done to us. A very emotional moment. And that's what we hope for.
In how many languages that you are doing this documentary to reach the people in India?
As many as we can.
So far, how many languages that you have done?
I believe we have it in Kannada has already been released. In fact, in Bangalore it was broadcast. We are working on a Hindi version. In fact, it's probably ready, but we've just got to get the logistical issues done. And I know that a Tamil version is high on our priority list, and Telugu as well.
Is really that your motto is to show the truth of the BBC, or else any hidden agenda that you have?
One of my most favorite Christian saints, yes, I have favorite Christian saints, was Saint Augustine in his wise period. He said, the truth doesn't need to be defended. It's a lion. It just needs to be released. And then let it do its work. And we know this to be true. We have seen that when a huge lie is revealed as such, it collapses. When a massive empire is revealed as a criminal enterprise, it collapses. We're seeing the Church of England in the United Kingdom collapsing right now. Yesterday, the Archbishop of Canterbury resigned because child abuse revelations came into the public domain, and he had protected the perpetrators by not acting according to the requirements. And so he has resigned. And all of a sudden in today's news, everybody was saying, why do we need the church? Whereas once upon a time, it was the power behind the British Empire. So when you release a truth, then it does its own work.
But you may get applause from the Bharat people, from the India, but you also may get threat from the British empires.
We are reincarnationists. Right? We just keep coming back until the job is done.
Okay.
Yeah? And this is an important thought, because Swami Chinmayanandaji, he said it really well. He said, we have lots of problems with people who are not Hindu. But the first thing we have to do is convert Hindus to Hinduism.
Okay.
So the moment we get our Sanatani family understanding what sanatandharmic principles are, then we should be fearless. Why would an immortal being be fearful? We know that our journey is transient. We know that what you own, we call it Maya, don't we? That it's not really a long-term ownership. When we go, we leave it all behind. All we've done in life is moved a whole load of stuff from here to here. That's all it is. So if you have a life which is based on dharmic principles, you have the most powerful being on the planet. I often say to youngsters, we used to be called Aryavrat, right? The nation of noble peoples. How many people do you know who you would think Arya when you meet them in our Sanatani family? When we have that generation back again, the world will watch and it will follow.
Again, if I touch the Aryan, Indo-Aryans, then it will be a big topic actually.
It's all rubbish. Make it a short topic. It's a complete and utter fabrication, and they had no adhikar to offer that as a theory. Adhikar is important. And we're having a conversation. When I meet people, I ask myself, what is this conversation? Is this a friend? Because with a friend, one can have a different conversation.
Yes.
With a student or a teacher, you have a different conversation.
Yes.
But when you're with somebody who is neither a friend, nor a student, nor a teacher, you have to ask, what adhikar has this person to ask me anything at all? And if the person is not a friend, then they have no adhikar to comment at all in my presence about any issue, unless they do so with courtesy, humility and respect.
Okay.
And this is how we should all work.
What is your major motto to do the BCC on trial, the documentary?
Peace, harmony, tranquility. It is an agent of chaos on a scale that few have suspected. As part of my research, when we were exploring Ireland, the Irish have a motto that if you walk past a house and there's an argument going on inside, a Britisher has walked past before you. Okay? In Persia, they have a motto. If there are two fish fighting in a pond, an Englishman has been fishing in the pond. Right? Just think of the difference between the two. We have got a lot of work to do to repair the damage that they have inflicted and that they're going to continue to inflict.
And finally, what you want to tell about your documentary, and as well as any message to given by you to Bharat people?
If anybody has criticisms about the documentary, we would really welcome them. If there are any things that are omissions or misstatements and can be corrected with evidence, we would welcome them. But in the absence of that, the documentary is not entertainment. It's not just something we've put out there so people can watch, have an emotional experience, then go back to their normal mundane life.
Yes.
It is a warning, it is a trumpeting that there is an agency which is determined to wreak havoc in Bharat, which has its purpose the prevention of the renaissance of the Dharmic identity. It has its purpose to conceal the atrocities that were inflicted over 280 years since the Europeans came here. And it's very present and it's real. So nobody in this country has a choice to ignore it.
Yes.
You may think, well, it's far away from me. It's not. It's in your room, it's in your radios, it's at the end of your phone, your children are being contacted by it.
Precisely.
And so please be aware that this is an entity which requires you to do something. We've given you the evidence, Baki. Ours is to act and not be responsible for the fruits.
Finally, can I listen any mantras that you have learned from the Hindu Dharmic?
I think in this time, probably the most powerful and which everybody should use is Asatoma Satgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Because we're talking about an agency which generates Asat.
Yes.
Okay? And we want to move from Asat towards a glimpse of what Satya is. When we do that, we move from darkness to light,
Yes.
which we need to do, and we're doing it. And we will move from the state where we are losing a huge number of our family members to very painful death towards being absent of death. And so that's one that I would suggest. The other one, and I will ask this as a request,
Yes.
please stop using the Shanti mantra. Okay, we need a Kranti mantra.
No
If there's
Shanti mantra at all.
no Shanti mantra, no.
This is not the time for
This
Shanti
is not
mantra,
the
you
time
mean
for
to say.
Shanti. So whenever I hear Om Dhyau Shanti, and then at the end of it they say Shanti, Shanti, I'm thinking, no, Kranti, Kranti, Kranti. So if we have a guru out there who has a Kranti mantra,
Yeah.
then it's the time to be articulating it. If we don't have one and we can't find one, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, he gave the Panj Pyare when he established the Khalsa Panth, he gave them the Brahm Kavach. And everybody should explore the Brahm Kavach. In this, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, he says, he implores Devi Shakti. And he names Devi Shakti with all of her 7 names.
Okay.
And he says, please come and reside in my sword so that I can be victorious on the battlefield. And the Brahm Kavach is the foundation of the Khalsa Panth. So more people should perhaps know the Brahm Kavach.
So, BBC on Trial,
Ji.
the documentary, when it's going to be on in theatre or in your own OTT platforms?
We didn't want to do it in a manner to make revenue. We wanted to do it in a manner that the maximum number of people would be able to see it.
To know the truth.
To know the truth. Because this is it's not a commercial sort of
Yes.
adventure and enterprise. The more people who see it, the more they will become vaccinated against the untruth factory, the mental viruses that the BBC creates. So it's available on YouTube. We're going to have it broadcast in some theatres, but more as a means of bringing people together so that we can get the maximum development of their understanding. We've got 2 places that it has to go.
Okay.
One is Delhi itself, Rajdhani, and then in Mumbai, and then we have got a launch in London.
Oh.
And I have a hope that it will be in the House of Commons.
Okay.
So we'll show it there to MPs.
Done, sir. I'll hope this documentary should see by more people and should know the truth. And they should have a justification to do after seeing the facts. And thank you so much for your time. Few more questions to ask you. I need your precious time back again. And I'm so happy to have you in the studio today, sir. Thank you so much, and I'm blessed to have you today.
You're very kind. I have said this to Vinodji a while ago, that we need an ecosystem, a long time ago.
Yes.
But I have to say, now that I've spent some time with Vinodji and with his network and the people who are working with him, who are supporting him and who he is supporting, the ecosystem is here.
Yes, sir.
We just haven't declared it yet. And so, wonderful work that you're doing at Signature.
Thank you so much.
I really hope that we can make your footprint in the United States and the UK much, much better. We get responses from Europeans
Yes.
that they are now getting better quality news
Okay.
from channels like Republic. And so why shouldn't they have better quality information and wisdom from channels like Signature? So best of luck with
Really,
the
thank
venture,
you
and I
so
look
much,
forward
sir.
to spending more time with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure.
Namaste. Jai Hind.
Jai Shri Ram, Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir.